Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Movie Night here on Random Trek. Captain's Log, Stardate. Well, let's be honest. Today's mission is less about strange new worlds and more about one very old obsession. Welcome aboard, everyone, to the podcast where we boldly go through the best and occasionally strangest corners of science fiction and beyond. Today, we're going to chart a course away from the Federation and straight into the depths of obsession, revenge, and one very large whale, as portrayed by none other than the legendary Patrick Stewart. That's right, today we are taking a look at Moby Dick, and not just any version, but the one where Captain Jean-Luc Picard himself trades in the Enterprise for the Pequod. But I'm not taking this voyage alone. Joining me, as always, is my trusty first officer, part sage, part wildcat, all mystery. He's Commander Brennan, the Mystical Mar. Brennan, are we ready for this?
Indeed, we are.
Absolutely. I am really excited for this, because today the line between Starfleet Command and Captain Ahab gets very thin. So we're going to grab our tricorders, keep an eye on the horizon, and maybe, just maybe, don't trust the captain when he says it's just a simple mission. But every crew for movie night needs more than just me and my first officer. We are joined by some repeated guests again. Brennan.
Yes, indeed. Returning to the ship, our good friend Admiral Scott Ferguson.
Thank you for getting it right.
Hello, and I can't remember the rank we gave you, Ken.
I would just put me as a plebeian Ken.
Okay, yes, and...
Call me Ishmael.
He's a harpooner.
Call me Ishmael.
There we go.
Weakwig. The bald-headed cannibal.
There we go.
All right, but yes, as my intro indicated, we're taking a look at Moby Dick. Now, Moby Dick is a big theme that we have discussed on this channel over and over again when we talk about the Wrath of Khan, when we talk about, of course, Patrick Stewart in First Contact and the direct reference that's made about him. It was only fitting that during the year of the Captain, when we chose a Patrick Stewart movie, I really wanted us to look at his portrayal of Captain Ahab in a mini-series nonetheless. So what is essentially a 3-hour movie, when you don't account for commercials or account for commercials and all of that, is really an interesting trip into this piece of literature. And this actually got me to read the book way back when it came out in 1998, 2 years after First Contact. So, as always, I'm going to turn the con over to Commander Brennan.
Thank you, Captain Sir. Yes, I did read the book last year. Finally, I had been wanting to do that for years. It's a good read, albeit a very, very long read, and we can debate whether certain chapters were necessary to the story at all. But the story itself is a timeless one. And it's a story that has become so significant culturally that everyone knows it even if they never read it. A story of the obsession of Captain Ahab and his desire to get revenge on the whale that injured him. And, of course, took off his leg. And that obsession runs to madness. This has been referenced multiple times in Star Trek. Most famously with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Or Khan Noonien Singh, who certainly is a fan of this book, thinks of himself kind of in the Captain Ahab role without realizing that just like what happened to Ahab, it was going to happen to him too. And then on the flip side, in Star Trek First Contact, Pequod has unwittingly become Ahab without realizing it. And of course, it's the great Alfre Woodard as Lily Sloan who reminds him of this fact. And in that story, he turns away from that before it's too late. So, this 1998 miniseries, or made-for-TV movie, I think is a very, very good adaptation of Moby Dick. And very well made, with maybe an occasional 90s TV CGI. But nonetheless, it still is very successful, I think. So we all know the story of Moby Dick. It's not any great mystery. So let's begin our analysis as we always begin. Captain Ingle, your thoughts on the story of Moby Dick?
Well, this kind of comes into two camps for me, because the story of Moby Dick, because I've read the book, I understand it a lot better. And Ahab's obsession is there, but there is also other themes too. So we have revenge, which is very plain and clear. The idea of fate, man versus nature, all are very prevalent. While in this movie, clearly, the idea of revenge is 100%. We see Ahab's obsession to an extreme extent, especially when you get into the second half of the miniseries. It's very clear that Ahab takes over. But I do feel that a lot of the other themes are muddled. A lot of the other things that are part of the story and part of Ahab's journey, or not Ahab, Ishmael's journey, because remember, Ishmael is supposed to be our point of view, and it deviates from that at times. So while the very basic plot of the story is revenge and Ahab's revenge, I and that it's absolutely fabulous. I think we miss out on a lot of the other features that come into it. But I will say, Moby Dick is a very long book. It's a very, very dense book. And to get all of that into what is essentially a 3-hour movie can be very challenging. So I love the overall story of Moby Dick, but I'm not the biggest happy fan of this adaptation in terms of getting that full story out there. We got the piece that everyone knows, and that's great, and it does it faithfully. But all the other things are kind of pushed to the side.
You know what this would benefit from, I think? Is to make an adaptation now, with what they can do with streaming shows now.
This would make a great streaming show. Have a series, a 6-7 episode series, hour apiece, and I think you could develop this really well.
Yeah, and we've seen some incredible miniseries recently. For example, the recent adaptation of Shogun.
Mm-hmm.
So, Moby Dick could really benefit from something like that, because then he would have the time.
Yeah.
To tell the story in full with all the elements of the story.
And again, what they give us isn't bad. I like the story that they are giving us. I do, but I'm spoiled that I've read more, and I know what else there is, and I want more of that so much. So it's not fair, and if I'm to judge it the way it is, it does what it sets out to do very well in its story. But I know there's way more to this story that I want.
Now, speaking of book readers and fans of the novel, by the way, written by Herman Melville, I believe in 1850. Let's go to the person who probably knows the book the best, and that's Ken.
Well, I've used this book many times in lessons at church, because I think it has messages at so many levels of life that Melville weaves through them. And it's sometimes, I agree with Chris, it's a very long book, but it is a very slow reading book if you're going to comprehend every message that's in there. It's incredibly slow reading. It took me weeks to go through it slowly. And one of the messages in the book that I really liked, that I highlighted, because I brought the book with me, is this passage in the presentation by Father Melville in his sermon. And it starts like this: "In this world, shipmates, sin that pays its way can travel freely and without a passport, whereas virtue, if a pauper, is stopped at all frontiers." It is such a profound statement of truth that we see it in every day.
It's easier to be evil than it is to be virtuous.
It is. And if you're poor and virtuous, oh, it's so much harder. But if you have money and you are not virtuous, you can do whatever you want. And we see it in everyday society, continuing today, that is quite the truth. But if I enjoyed the book, I review the book periodically. I don't reread the book, but I go back to thoughts and things that I think about, either from preparing a lesson or a conversation, so that I'm familiar with how Melville presented the information. And so on the back of this book, there's this great quote from a person by the name of Elizabeth Hardwick. She calls it the greatest novel in American literature. And I think everybody should take time to read it or listen to it. If you can't read it, listen to it. There are so many lessons of life that it can change the way you think and perhaps the way you act.
Indeed. After we get your thoughts, Scott, I want to put a pin in Father Melville's sermon, which I think it is very significant to the story, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So your thoughts, Scott, on the story of Moby Dick and the adaptation of this film?
Actually, I never read it.
Which is exactly what Lily Sloan said in Star Trek First Contact.
I see what you did, Scott. I see what you did.
But he's in the process.
Well, I started reading it, then I got to somewhere around after the Father Melville sequence, around the point where Queequeg and Ishmael go to Nantucket, and I kind of stalled there. Sorry. But I do think this was a fairly well done adaptation. Not so much based on how it compares to the book, but just in and of itself, and also compared to other adaptations, and that's something that I am going to want to go into in detail in today's podcast, how it compares to the other adaptations. Because my dad and I prepped for this podcast by watching several different adaptations.
Like 4 or 5, Scott.
6.
6. Oh my gosh. Some of them were painful.
Indeed. So, what I was saying earlier about the Father Melville sermon is very interesting because of how it relates to the story of what occurs in the book. Father Melville recounts the story of Jonah, and the 4 of us have grown up hearing the story of Jonah from the Bible. And one of the maybe most referenced Bible stories there is. So, we'll start with you, Chris. The sermon that Father Melville gives on the story of Jonah, and those listening who do not know the story of Jonah, I'll recount it. Jonah was called by God to go to Nineveh and preach repentance to the people. He didn't want to do that, and so he gets on a ship with the desire to pretty much sail to the other end of the Mediterranean escape his calling. A great storm arises, and all the passengers think this is vengeance from God because someone on board has sinned. Jonah admits, I'm the one who sinned, I'm the one who refused to do God's work. I should be thrown overboard to save the ship. He's thrown out in the water, the storm stops, the ship is saved. Then, the Bible says a great fish swallows up Jonah. And in the belly of the whale, Jonah repents and calls unto God and accepts his calling. And the fish vomits him out on the land. He goes to Nineveh and the people repent. So Chris, obviously this is a story that I think we've all grown up on. What are your thoughts on the significance of how this sermon about Jonah connects to what's actually going on in the story?
So, obviously, I mean, this sermon is brief when you compare it to the rest of the story. It's brief, but it's so powerful, and it gives us one of the clearest windows into the moral and philosophical core of what this story is about. And as you said in the sermon, Melville tells the story of Jonah, man swallowed by the whale. And on the surface, that seems just like a simple story, but Melville is using it to explore those themes of duty and truth and consequences of obsession. It's almost giving us a heads up of what's to come, which is always a really good writing technique. And I'm really glad that our screenwriters carried that over successfully. And we'll get into who the actor is in a moment, because that's kind of important. But Melville emphasizes running from responsibility is impossible. You can't get away from it. Just as Jonah tries to flee his calling, but he can't escape the truth and consequences of his actions. And Melville's words aren't gentle. They're strong. They're fierce, as a very fire and brimstone preacher would be at the time. I would absolutely expect this. And almost confrontational. And he makes it very clear that obedience to the higher power of God, acceptance of your limits, and confronting those truths is essential for survival. And I think they would talk about survival, because the majority of these people on Nantucket, what are they? They're whalers. And it is a dangerous existence. This is a historical novel. Though historical fiction, it's historical. And so he's talking to these people who are going out and risking their lives day in and day out. And people died on whaling ships regularly. This is actually based on multiple stories, most famous being the USS Essex, but also other stories of whales at the time where, there were whales who would attack ships. That was not an uncommon thing. So back to this sermon. What makes it most important, though, is how it mirrors the story of Ahab. And so Jonah running away from his duty, Ahab refused to run away from this obsession when given multiple opportunities. He had every chance, and God gave Jonah every chance. Hey, do your duty. Do what you're supposed to do. And he didn't. And then when Jonah eventually does find redemption submitting to his purpose, Ahab never submits. He never gives in to anything outside of his own hatred and will. So in this sense, Melville's sermon is setting up that moral contrast that is driving our entire narrative of this story. And the reader or the watcher sees the danger. We see it as it's happening. We're hearing people warn it consistently. Even when he's giving the sermon and it hasn't happened yet, by the intensity, we know that this is wrong. He is the voice of reason in this. And Ahab's attitude goes unchecked. And so it defies the spiritual framework that Ahab should be following. And it works heavily on our thematic levels too. And it reminds us that truth is not always comforting. Sometimes it's hard and brutal and ruthless. And it's difficult. but it's also unavoidable at times. And Melville stands alone on his pulpit up high, all by himself, delivering these hard truths to the entire congregation. And similarly, those who are seeking truth or act in conviction can find themselves isolated or misunderstood. So I think in a lot of ways, and I guess I'm kind of giving a book report here, but Melville's also asking our readers to consider how they respond when confronted with truth about the challenges to their desires or their ego. Do they accept it? Do they rebel as Ahab does? And the symbolism in the sermon is so powerful. The whale in Jonah's story is a force of nature and possibly even divine judgment. Melville's warnings remind us that in those forces of nature, fate, or even moral law, it can't be outrun. It cannot be avoided. It is inevitable. And Ahab's failure to heed to those lessons leads to his downfall, reinforcing that novel central idea of obsession when combined with a refusal to respect our limits and higher truths will lead to a destruction every time. So I think his sermon is far more than just a religious retelling. It is a moral and philosophical blueprint for what's to come in the story. And it contrasts Jonah's own obedience with Ahab's rebellion. It underscores that danger of obsession. And it challenges the characters and the readers to confront those uncomfortable truths. It's a moment that demands attention because it asks the ultimate question right up front. Will you face the truth that defines your life, or will you, like Ahab, allow your obsessions and hatred to blind you? The sermon is short, but its echo runs through the entire story. It shapes the story. It frames the characters and everything we're going to go through and sets it off. And it's one of those clear examples of Melville's philosophy of truth being inescapable, duty being unavoidable, and our response will determine our fate.
Indeed. Scott, your thoughts on this?
I'm inclined to agree, I guess.
I think I let the professor in me out. I'm so sorry.
Yes. Do you have anything you wish to add, Scott?
Yeah. When are we going to talk about Incubus?
Yes, there's our first reference to Incubus in this one.
Ken?
All right, Ken, your thoughts on Father Melville's sermon?
Well, I enjoyed listening to Chris's summary and analysis of the role of Father Melville, but I struck me a comparison to Starbuck. Starbuck is the voice of reason, and Starbuck's role is similar to Father Melville. He is the anchor of wisdom and truth and virtue and trying to persuade Ahab during the story. And he plays a similar role because he is the voice in the wilderness of chaos and hate and all the other things that are wrapped up into the story as they pursue the white whale to try and say this is a fool's errand. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be whaling and returning our men to their families. You're going to deprive all these men or their families of these people if we pursue this white whale even further. So I think it's a good comparison between Starbuck and Melville.
I think Starbuck, though, is a problem inherently unto himself because, yes, he speaks the truth consistently. Don't do this, don't do this. And yet, in the end, what does he keep telling Ishmael? I have to follow the captain. I have to do my duty. He puts Ahab's obsession above it only because he is the first officer and does not have the conviction to do what was necessary. A mutiny, as rough as it would have been right and called for here, but instead he put his duty above everything. That's admirable, but is that right when we're putting lives at risk? You know, a lot of Jewish doctrine teaches that, you know, you live by the laws, you don't die by the laws.
But
here, like, he's going to die by these laws.
Yes. And I think sometimes he measured the crew's connection to Ahab because Ahab and he struggled over the attention of the crew. They struggled on who would win the battle. And I think Starbuck realized that Ahab pursued the hearts of the men with money and fame, and Starbuck was trying to use wisdom and truth.
They remind me of the dwarves in Erebor, when Oakenshield was struck with the dragon sickness and wanting the Arkenstone, and they followed him. Bilbo was the only one sitting there going, this is wrong. This isn't okay. And even though the dwarves were saying, well, I don't agree. We're trying to talk him out of it, but he's our king. We're going to follow him. To me, they were Starbuck at that moment, and yet they were following him. And how easily Ahab was able to twist them and manipulate them. And I make that comparison because I just got done reading The Hobbit with my seventh graders. And I see this. They were willing to let it happen and to walk with it simply out of duty and right to the king. It's not okay. Just because you wear a crown or you're born to it doesn't make you right. Just because you're the captain, you have a greater responsibility to your crew and to the ship than to the mission. I'm sorry.
You know, it's interesting, when we all did the trials at Nuremberg review, that there's a similar comparison here between Hitler and Ahab. Hitler used fear and persuasion and all the powers at his end to not only run the World War II, but also to wipe out the Jews. And you know, in Nuremberg, there were those who should have known, and there were those who did know, and then there are the people who claim that they didn't know what was going on. And so there's some comparisons to these characters that have these strong wills put in positions of power to drive their agenda.
And very well said. So let's turn our attention to the cast of this series. There's a lot of actors here, so I don't want to go into each one, but I do want to point out that there are two actors in here that appeared in the original Mad Max movies. First, you have Bruce Spence as Elijah the Prophet, the kind of crazy guy in Nantucket who refers to a prophecy that the Pequod will be destroyed and only one person will survive.
Yeah.
The other actor is Hugh Keys-Byrne, who plays Mr. Stubb, played the villain in the first Mad Max film, and in Morton Joe in Mad Max Fury Road. And I think he gives a nice performance as Mr. Stubb. We have, of course, Elliot himself, Henry Thomas, as Ishmael. And I think the three best performances in this series. Let's start with Ted Levine as Starbuck. Now, Ted is a character actor who has appeared in so many things. Whether it be The Silence of the Lambs or the series Monk. I think his performance as Starbuck is excellent in creating this really empathetic character that wants to obey the captain but also knows what's happening is wrong. And the moral conflict that he endures. I think Ted Levine is terrific. Scott, your thoughts on this?
I agree, and I also think it's interesting that that same year that this version of Moby Dick was released, Ted Levine was also part of another prominent miniseries, From the Earth to the Moon, which was about the Apollo program. Levine played Alan Shepard, the first American in space.
Same year?
So he played a rather prominent role in that series. same year. I just think that's kind of cool.
Yes, and Ken, your thoughts on bringing Starbuck to life with this actor?
I can't remember his face. I watched all the movies with Scott, and so I probably wouldn't be as strong to offer my opinion about how well he did as Starbuck. But I think the character of Starbuck is essential to the story. It brings us supposedly back to the grounding of reality and virtue and clear thinking, but ultimately, like Chris points out, he fails. And then hence we got the name of Starbucks Coffee. But anyway.
And Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica.
So it's essential to see the similarities. If you've ever been involved in major decisions and stuff like that, when there is a voice in the wind like Starbucks, you really should be listening to it, because it's the clarion of truth. It's the voice of reason in a world of chaos and hate and envy and power and control. It's all of these things, and sometimes you need to listen to the voice that's quiet and thoughtful.
Very well said. Chris, your thoughts on Ted Levine here?
I found him to be an example of, and again, if we're to consider these themes of faith and religion, I found him to be probably the most human character, because this is the kind of man that they warn you about in church. Don't be the kind of person that talks, but will not perform actions. The reality is, he knew what was right. And Levine's performance plays into that very well. He's a strong actor, and he tends to play these roles with people that deal in power in one way or another. I'm thinking of Buffalo Bill, very, very, well, he eventually gets taken down, but very, all about power over his victims. I think of Stoudemire in Monk. He's the police detective, and he keeps Monk on the straight and narrow, and, there's a certain power in that. Starbuck has power. He has the power to stop all of this. If there's one man on that ship who can stop Ahab, it's him, and he was that close. When Ahab was about to realize the folly of his ways, and it looked like Starbuck was about to commit murder. It really seemed like that. Every moment that he had the chance to do it, he showed weakness, and he did nothing. And there is nothing worse than to see something wrong, to know something is wrong, and to do nothing. And for that, I find the character to be weak. But at the same time, that is probably a very human thing, and many of us could relate to that. How many things in our world do we see wrong in our everyday lives and we do nothing? We stay out of it because we don't want to get involved. It's not our place. It's not my duty. It's not my responsibility. And in him, it was his duty and responsibility. And I do think Levine plays to that very well. But I find the character overall not as he's bad, but he's a weak character. And I mean that positively, if that makes sense.
Maybe he means well, but he lacks the drive to actually stand against the captain, because he does have the moral quandary within himself. Does he stand for the men, or does he commit murder?
I think he's a little cowardly, hiding behind the title. And then when he is ready to do something, he's ready to commit murder. Also a cowardly act. You stand up to your captain. When your captain said no, you go, absolutely not. Your mission, your job, is to get these men home with the cargo. And he had multiple opportunities to do that and refused that, and he did nothing. And even when he sits there and everything's going to heck in a handbasket, he tells Ahab, he's the captain. I have to follow him. I have to do my duty. He is a coward to hide behind the title.
Indeed. We also must mention the Academy Award winner, the legend Gregory Peck, appearing as Father Melville, and of course Gregory Peck had played Captain Ahab in John Huston's film of Moby Dick.
Mm-hmm.
There's really not much to say about the performance other than it's fantastic. Because Gregory Peck always delivers. And to get the kind of energy to be Father Melville, to have this kind of, a little bit on the fire and brimstone, a little bit, but definitely, you pay attention when he's on screen. And that sermon is fantastic because we laid out why it's so important to the narrative of this story. But this was Gregory Peck's last on-screen role. He passed away a few years after this. But the fact that he was able to come back after many years and be in Moby Dick again.
He won a Golden Globe for this.
Yes.
Rendition.
Yes, it's so terrific to have him there. And there's not much we can say other than there's a reason why he is one of the great actors of all time.
And such a great legacy of this character. Orson Welles himself has played this character. Mm-hmm. Later on, Donald Sutherland would come to play this character. There's gravitas and power in it, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have to come to the headliner here. So 2 years after Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard made great references to Moby Dick in Star Trek First Contact, he appears as Ahab in this production, and I think this really shows us how great an actor Patrick Stewart is. And one of the things I really like about this adaptation is keeping the language of Melville. The sort of Elizabethan, biblical, Shakespearean language. And who better to bring that to life than Sir Patrick Stewart? So, Chris, Pat Stew as Ahab.
There's just so much anger and hatred and spite. And the fact that he finishes the movie 3 years prior and he goes, you know what? I want to do this. And it kind of was a driving force to make this film. It wasn't the sole reason. They were already wanting to work on it, but he wanted to do this. And it feels like it was built for him. It's so opposite of Pequod. It really is. Pequod, though he can give in to that hatred as we saw in First Contact, we can also see that with the right people, and that's what makes Pequod a good captain, is the people he has around him. Here he just takes that and hits it out of the park continuously. And I love the descent, because it starts out, he's a very charismatic man. And he's charismatic the whole way through. But the fact that our true introduction to him, beside whispers, and we don't talk about the captain, and the captain will come when the captain is ready, there's a mystery to it. And we don't even really get to see him fully, I think, until towards the end of the very first half of it. So he comes in, and the first thing he does is he comes up and he tells the men exactly where he stands. I want that whale. And we're hunters. We will get it. In fact, the person that helps me get it, and he pounds a gold doubloon. It's a gold doubloon, right? Or a gold piece.
Yeah, Spanish
of Spanish gold. Spanish gold, to the mast, and says, the man that finds me and gets me that whale gets this. And it becomes this symbol of greed, this symbol of this obsession. And it starts out, I love that they're doing the hunting, and every time there's an opportunity, well, did you see the whale? Did you see the whale? And it becomes more and more forceful as they come across their excursions and meet with people. Did you eat the whale? Where's the whale? Where's the whale? It builds and builds and builds and builds. You see the obsession from the very beginning. How far is he willing to go with that obsession? Well, the answer to that is to death, because that's exactly what happens. And I absolutely love, in the end, his consistency to the character. And when he gets caught up with the whale, even in the last moments, he's fighting it. And eventually the whale drags him down with it. His eyes open wide, and he got his whale. Or more aptly, his whale got him. But his expressions, his charisma, his push, and the fact that he never even really gets super angry in this. I mean, sometimes he gets very energetic, but he's got his eyes on his prize. And Patrick Stewart understood the assignment. Stewart ends up getting nominated for an Emmy for this, for lead actor in a miniseries or movie, and it's well deserved. This is such a good portrayal for him. And it's so nice to be opposite from Captain Pequod, what he will probably always be recognized for.
Yes, and this certainly takes advantage of his Shakespearean stage training. And it just feels so like you're watching a stage play come to life, really. It's incredible. Ken, your thoughts on this performance?
You know, I think I agree with Chris, but also I think the mystique of Ahab starts early on in the story when the men below deck can hear him come out on night because of his peg leg hitting the deck above. It adds to the mystique and the power of the story that they can hear he's roaming around the ship above them when they're down below, and they all stop and listen to the thud of the leg hitting the deck. It scares them. That puts them in awe. They wonder, what is this man that's doing this? But I also enjoyed the Patrick Stewart's comment in First Contact, and I brought it to read because I really enjoy it, because it describes hate to me in language that I think is pure Melville.
Is it the cannon speech?
Yes. He piled upon the whale's white hump the sum of all the general rage and hate felt by his whole race, from Adam down, and then, as if his chest had been a mortar, he burst his hot heart's shell upon it. That was the level of commitment that if it took his life and every life that he could possibly touch to kill the whale, that's what he would do. So I think Stewart does a fine job. I think there are some better ones that have done it, but I think he adds depth to the story. I think he does a good job, and I think it's accurate in Melville's book of what he does.
There's an interesting thing, too, that I didn't notice until later, that his peg leg is made of whalebone.
Oh, yeah.
And so, literally, it's the whale took a piece of him, and now it's not literally that whale, but metaphorically, the whale is now a part of him for the rest of his life, and he won't let it go. That leg, that thing that is moving him forward, is also what kills him.
What he's standing on.
Yeah.
And he's got a spare one, too. So it's that mystique of at night, you're lying in your bunk, and you hear this thud, 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 and there's only one thing that makes that kind of noise. It's rhythmic to a walk. which is someone's whale bone peg leg holding the captain up as he walks around the deck of the ship at night, and they all hear it. So there's this non-verbal, non-facial relationship that's beginning with the crew of, this is who I am, I'm coming, and you'll hear me and see me.
All right, Scott, now I believe would be the proper time to discuss the other adaptations of Moby Dick and how they compare to this one. So
Well,
take it away.
as I said earlier, my dad and I prepped for this podcast by rewatching not only the Patrick Stewart version of Moby Dick, but also the Gregory Peck version and the William Hurt version that came later. I prepped by watching both of the John Barrymore versions way back in the day. And Dad and I also watched the version with Barry Bostwick, which is the modern day version. And on the whole, my dad and I both agree. We agree that the one with William Hurt is probably the best one overall. I mean, it just had better production values. The visual effects were a lot better, and me personally, I like what they did with the character of Ishmael in that one. They really built up the role of Ishmael to really have him be a more active role in the story. I mean, he's still basically an observer, but adjusting the story in this way allowed him to more directly observe Ahab. And by interacting with Ahab, talking to Ahab more, he begins to understand the obsession that Ahab has for hunting Moby Dick, because Ishmael begins to develop that same obsession, having seen the whale himself. But late in the story, Ahab crosses a line that Ishmael refuses to cross. And because Ishmael is loyal, he cares about the lives of the crew, and he's not willing to sacrifice them in pursuit of this obsession. So that's kind of where the character of Ishmael goes in that newer version. I think that was really well done in that one. I also William Hurt gives a much more human performance as Ahab. Yes, he's obsessed, he's driven, and he puts the lives of the crew in danger and all that, but we get to see his relationship with his wife and son. We get to really appreciate who he is as a person, even as he allows that obsession to destroy himself and his crew. I think that was really well done. I also kind of liked John Barrymore's performance, particularly in the 1926 silent version called The Sea Beast. And I should mention that The Sea Beast and the 1930 film version with John Barrymore both diverged quite a bit from the story, in that they both end with Ahab surviving, conquering the whale, and returning home to his girlfriend.
Yes.
But both movies, especially the 1926 silent version, do really grapple with the theme of revenge and whether revenge is worth pursuing. So it's there. They just lead it to a different conclusion. I mean, a different outcome, I should say.
Yes.
And I should mention that the Patrick Stewart version isn't the only version of Moby Dick with a Star Trek connection. Because, as was mentioned earlier, Gregory Peck, who played Father Mapple, had previously played Ahab in the earlier version. Well, Gregory Peck's grandson is Ethan Peck.
Exactly, and you know what's funny is you can hear it in his voice.
He plays Spock in Strange New Worlds.
He sounds a lot like his grandfather.
Additionally, John Barrymore's son, John Drew Barrymore, was hired to guest star in an episode of the original series, specifically The Alternative Factor, as Lazarus.
Yes.
But he reneged on the contract and refused to, he didn't show up to film, so he got sued. And they had to recast the role. And incidentally, John Drew Barrymore's daughter is Drew Barrymore. Mm-hmm. So we get another E.T. connection.
Yes, there are a lot of connections to be had here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when Ahab throws himself on the whale to kill it, and you see him stabbing at it with a harpoon over and over and over, in almost all of these stories, either with a sword or a harpoon, you wonder how much damage it's doing to the whale. But I just looked up how big a whale's heart is. A whale's heart, a blue whale, I guess it's the largest, its heart can weigh between 400 to over 1,000 pounds. It's the size of a small golf cart, 5 feet by 4 feet. That's an incredible muscle, an incredible amount of power in that whale that we think are just lumbering through the ocean, but they are really, really massive machines of power.
We also don't, at least then I would argue, we didn't give the respect to these creatures that they deserve. They are intelligent, smart beings. When we're talking the 1800s, you know, there is a reason that many whales were put on the endangered species list even into well into the 20th century, and some still are today. There are some countries in this world that still hunt whales. There are far fewer than there ever was, but they
Japan
do exist.
is one of them.
Yeah. But the reality is that this was based, again, on an amalgamation of stories. There was a famous story of a Moby Dick-like whale that caused the sinking of a ship. It's not the Essex, but the story of the Essex also plays into the inspiration for Melville in this as well. And once again, we give no respect. We have not given the respect to those creatures, and I think that is a theme that Melville was well ahead of his time with, interesting enough, connecting to Star Trek IV and the ecological message that was going through there.
Yeah, quite the opposite of Moby Dick in that one.
Yeah.
Interesting that you should bring that up because, again, I haven't read it, but I do know one thing about the book that I've read from other sources, is that there is a sequence in the book where Herman Melville in the voice of Ishmael, imagines what whale hunting is like from the perspective of the whales themselves, if I understand correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, and he also imagines what will happen when whales are hunted to extinction. What then? So in that sense, Melville himself kind of gave these whales respect, even as he was writing about whale hunters.
That's true, but if I am to give the separating the art from the artist argument, which I sit for all the time, then it has to work the other way too, to where whatever this movie is, it's not Melville. Though Melville influenced these themes are there. We're going to discuss them. I get it. I don't know entirely if it was his intention. We can infer from it, sure, and I think that's wonderful. But I think it's clear the movie does not do that justice. And look, in the end, I think we all four can recommend this. Take your time, read the book, please do. It is a powerful, amazing piece, one of the greatest pieces that American literature has ever released. But that being said, the movie doesn't focus enough in that. I do like that the whale is not viewed as this horrible creature. It is just a powerful force of nature. It is what it is. It is neither good nor evil. It is just nature. And isn't that an interesting thing when you think about this is a pure creation of God? God is truly good from our perspective, and yet he is neither good or evil. He just is. The actions we talk about go into that. So I really like the whale aspect of this is presented, but the people in this book, in this story, other than the one moment you mentioned, they don't give the reverence to whales that is deserved. They just treat them as a commodity or something to be hunted for different reasons. But that's all they are to them.
Anyway, going back to the comparison to other productions, I did want to give a shout out to the one with Barry Bostwick. It was a very, very cheesy movie.
Yeah,
By the
totally
way,
cheesy.
I have met Barry Bostwick.
Wow.
He's a wonderful, wonderful man.
And he gives and I mean this is a compliment, he gives a very over-the-top performance as Ahab. It was, let me put it this way, go into this movie with very low expectations and you will be pleasantly surprised.
It's one of those kind of low budget.
Very
you know,
low budget.
yeah.
Very, almost no budget we're talking here.
I like Birdemic or Sharknado kind of movies.
Yes. But for all of that, I feel like it still understands at least some of what Herman Melville was going for. I mean, they're not whale hunters. They're, in fact, United States Navy personnel aboard a nuclear submarine. But they're still hunting the whale. And although Starbuck is still the voice of reason in all this, he still, in the end, just follows orders. But the moment where someone tries to kill Ahab is actually given to another character, but another character also from the book, that other captain who lost a limb to Moby Dick. In this movie, he and Ahab had been shipmates on another nuclear submarine back in the 60s, and they were both attacked by Moby Dick at the same time, but this other captain had not allowed himself to give in to obsession or revenge or anything like that, and was able to have a fairly normal life, even with a missing limb. And yet, upon hearing that what Ahab might be up to, he takes it upon himself to go track down Ahab, get in touch with him, find out what's going on, and when he finally does confront Ahab, he's the one who almost kills him, but after talking to Ahab, finds that he can't bring himself to do that. And I think that moment was the fact that it wasn't just another captain, but a former shipmate of Ahab who understood fully what Ahab was going through.
Brennan, I need to sign off. I've got to go do some stuff.
Certainly. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Gentlemen, I enjoyed it tremendously. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Anyway, I think that was really well done. Even with all the really easy cheapness around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear to me that when we talk about the great American novel, which there have been great debates about, because certainly we could look at the works of Hemingway or Faulkner, or even Louisa May Alcott with Little Women. I think it's clear that Moby Dick is most consistently ranked as the greatest American novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I would agree. I do feel that some of the passages are a bit on the extraneous side, but that was the writing style of the time. Nonetheless, as a story, as the story itself, not only is it a story that everyone knows, but a story that has influenced so many works of art and is so familiar to audiences. Yes, Scott.
Not just direct adaptations of Moby Dick, mind you. I think it's influenced other works of art as well, and I think the most obvious one on everyone's minds here is Jaws.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, and I'm not just speaking out of the blue here either. They actually considered including a scene in Jaws where Quint, the Robert Shaw character, the shark hunter, is in a movie theater watching the Gregory Peck film version of Moby Dick and laughing at it. They couldn't
That sounds like something his character would do.
They couldn't get the rights from Gregory Peck though. He vetoed it, so they couldn't include that scene. But they were actually considering doing that.
Yeah, I mean Jaws, obviously Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 8.
I would also add to that Das Boot.
Das Boot, yes, that's right. Yes, so many films and stories that are related or inspired by Moby Dick. And the amazing thing about it is even in children's cartoons, I used to be a big fan of the Fairly Odd Parents. I still am. And they had an episode where Timmy found himself transported into a lot of the great American novels. And one of them was Moby Dick. And so this is a story that is so broad in its appeal that it has had an effect immeasurably on literature and cinema. And certainly Star Trek would not be the same without Moby Dick. And the use of it in Star Trek 2, particularly with Khan paraphrasing the novel, and of course Khan ending his life the same way Ahab did. With, for hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. One of the things I find interesting is that Ahab and Starbuck and Peleg and the owners of the ship, I forget the name of the other one, Peleg and Bildad, is that they are Quakers. So they speak in a biblical Shakespearean style of using a lot of thee and thou and words like that, which I think add to the flavor of the story of Moby Dick, of making it just a literary treasure trove of so many great quotes and so many memorable moments. So now we could sort of come to the end. I mean, I think it's very clear that this miniseries is a recommendation from us, and also a recommendation to check out the other series and the movies.
And I should mention that as of recently, all 6 of them are legally available to watch on YouTube for free.
Yes, and so we would definitely recommend checking it out, and as Captain Ingle pointed out, read the book. It's long. There are certain passages that maybe can be skipped. But overall, it is a good read, and there is a reason why it is often considered the greatest American novel. And one of the greatest novels ever written. So with all that said, I turn the con back to Captain Ingalls.
Thank you very much. And as always, I want to thank Scott and Ken for coming in. I love when we get to talk a little historical fiction. You'll be back with us later this year, I think end of October, when we look at 13 Days and the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think my dad's going to be joining us for that one as well.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait. You guys have a lot of great historical perspectives and knowledge, and I enjoy our conversation. So, as always, we are blessed to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on the show.
All right. Well, let's talk about what's coming up. So, next week, we have Star Trek Pequod, I do believe. Yes. All right. let's see what episode of Star Trek Picard we get. Spin the wheel. We are going to get Season 2, Episode 3, Assimilation. Yes. All right. Annie Wershing as the Borg Queen is always worth watching.
Yes.
I love her so much. R.I.P. Annie Wershing. And then at the end of April, we are moving on with the month of the Captain. Next month, we are dedicating that to one Captain Lorca, Jason Isaacs. And we're going to be taking at another historical drama that absolutely is not really historical at all. We are taking a look at The Patriot.
Not
Yes.
Armageddon?
No. And we will be joined by my other partner in crime, my other brother. Well, he's not literally my brother, but he is my brother from another mother. Chris Doman will be joining us, taking a look at The Patriot. And I love this movie. It is the most inaccurate movie possible, and yet it's one of the best Revolutionary War movies ever made.
No, anything with Mel Gibson and historical accuracy just doesn't really.
Well, I did like Passion. I did like The Passion.
Okay. Fair.
And we are going into Easter, so I think The Passion might be coming up here very soon for me.
Bloody, I think. Little bloody.
It is a little bloody, but that's fine. So was the crucifixion. But anyway, I digress. So that is what's coming up. We did receive a little bit of sad news this week, and I'm not happy about this. After finishing Star Trek Starfleet Academy's first season, it was announced that they were canceling it, and it will not be coming back after the finished second season. I'm very disappointed by this.
Yes.
Very unhappy.
Happy news, yes.
Because this is kind of sort of what has happened as well to Prodigy, and it's just a
And
really...
also Star Wars The Acolyte.
Yeah,
The same problem.
this is well, Acolyte wasn't great.
Long story.
Long story. It's a love-hate relationship. Anyway, but so I'm very sad to see that. However, we are not going to let that deter us, because after Picard, we will now be adding Starfleet Academy. So we will be discussing one of the episodes from that series, and we give our thoughts about it. So that's coming up. I am really excited about it. Admiral, you got anything to plug?
Let me think. Incubus.
Is it the
There's
band?
our second Incubus reference.
I was like, it's the band, right?
No,
There's a band called Incubus, and I'm like, we're talking the band? Music?
we most certainly are not.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Go look it up.
You'll have to
not-
explain it to me.
I know what an Incubus is, but, that's a different story.
Brennan, where can the people find you?
Alright, you can find me on Blue Sky, Brennan Ryan at bluesky.social. Instagram and Threads at Brennan Blue. Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube at Page Turners They Were Not.
You can find me on Twitch and Twitter at CIngle1984. And as always, we end every episode. Kapla! And live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.
Yeah, what he said.